Jimmy Williams. Um, we have known each other for a long time. I
A
was trying
long time.
to, it's got to be pushing somewhere close to 25 years.
Yeah,
And
man. Our families grew up together. Our kids grew up together, and you and I did a lot of stuff together. We were in church together for a long time, and did a lot of music together, and just hung out, did life together. And so, yeah, dude, this is awesome. I can't think of anybody else I'd rather have a conversation with than you.
that's awesome. It is really cool full circle. Jimmy pulled me out of retirement from my old band days, playing in those CD establishments, and got me on worship team in a youth band on Wednesday nights. And I was blown away by participating in that. And then we went from there to a startup church. And I got to serve under Jimmy's leadership as the worship pastor. He was the worship pastor, and I got to serve on his team for a number of years there. And that was well before the technology of companies such as Loop Community. We were analog. We had the books and the paper and the sheets and the
That's right.
binders and
Big
the
binders.
all the things. It was awesome. So we go way back,
Yeah.
and got to cross paths many times over these last 20 to 25 years, and then to get to sit down recently and kind of reconvene this way has just been a pleasure. And so part of why we're here today is, and I do want to hear a little bit about that story of kind of how you landed with Jesus culture.
Mhm.
And then I want to get into the more prominent question of you said something at a meeting we had recently, a coffee meeting, that really struck me. And I thought this is something that people need to hear when they're writing for the church specifically. So tell us a little bit of how you landed where you are right now.
Yeah, man, it's been a journey for sure. I think when you and I first started hanging out, I had been in Christian music for about 8 years, more on the administrative side, and I was doing copyright and royalties. Started with Brentwood Music, which was like the mom and pop company that eventually became Provident Music. It was Jim Van Hook's company, and we were a tiny instrumental music company at the time. And but I was there during a lot of transition of them being purchased, and then that parent company buying Reunion Records, and then eventually buying Benson Records, and merging all that together to form Provident Music Group. So it was a season of a lot of change, and some really cool stuff that was going on in music. And I always tell people, like, my first claim to fame in the music business is I got to do all of the song agreements for the Jars of Clay first record, which was super cool. But yeah, so when you and I met, I had just started to transition out of there during that 8 years that I was working in Christian music. At the same time, I was leading worship at church, and I loved what I did on the business side, but my heart was really more on the worship side, leading worship, and just pastoring people, raising up young leaders. And so that was my passion, and eventually I had the opportunity to step into that full time, which is where you and I started hanging out and doing music together. And it was awesome. It was a really really sweet time. It was a lot of hard work. Planning churches is no joke, and so anybody that's ever done that gets what I'm saying. But it was also a time of a real blessing. There's a lot of fruit and relationships that still exist today. I mean, we still have a lot of great friends that were part of that season there with our church. And but eventually that church began to wrap up, and I ended up going back into the music business. At the time, I started working for what was then EMI Christian Music, and I was more again on the administrative side. I was doing some PRO work, which I know you're super familiar with, and then film and TV licensing and some things like that. And I was there for a couple of years, ended up stepping out again for about a year. The church I was attending was starting a new service, and they were like, "Hey, would you come on board and help us launch this thing?" And so I stepped away from the music business for about a year and did full-time church worship ministry. And then I got a call from Eddie DeGarmo over at EMI Christian Music, and Eddie said, "Hey, we've got an opening at Worship Together. We need somebody to come in and run this division. And, we would love for you to come back and do it. And, Worship Together had always been really special to me because as I was learning about worship and growing, one of the first events I ever went to was a Worship Together conference. I think it was in 1999 or something like that at the what was then the People's Church in Franklin. And man, it just blew my mind. I was like, Matt Redman was there, and some guys from the UK were over, and Sonic Flood was there, and it was just, you know, amazing. And I'd never experienced anything like that in that type of setting. And you and I both were like, we grew up being in bands, like we were band guys. And so it's really the first time I'd ever experienced worship in like a real modern context with a band and great musicians and all these kind of cool sounds and guitars. And man, I just walked away from that like, what in the world was that? And how can I be involved more with
Yeah.
that? And so when EMI called and Eddie called and said, hey, would you come back and run worship together? I went to my church leadership and shared with them, and it was unanimous. Everybody said, you know what, this is who you are. This is such a passion of yours. You should go do it. And so that started, I didn't know that I would be there as long as I was, but it started a 17-year kind of stint and term there at EMI, would become Capital Christian Music Group. And man, it was just such an incredible ride. I was so grateful for all of the years that I was there. I got to work with so many of my heroes in the worship world, and be a part of some songs that went around the world, and it was just super special time, man. And I was so grateful. And I think probably a couple of years ago, probably during 2020, like COVID, as it did for many people, just gave everybody a chance to sort of take a step back and ask a lot of questions like, am I really doing what I feel like I need to be doing right now? Is there something else, that God has for me? And I think it probably started in 2020 when I first, for the 15, 16 years I'd been there, for the first time I started to think, you know what, there may be like another season, there may be something else that, that I should do, eventually. And I didn't know what that was. I didn't know when it was. And it sort of nagged me. I'd say it kind of nagged me and chased me for about 2 years. And yeah, at times it was frustrating because I was like, man, I feel this, but I don't really know what it is. And so I had some good friends praying with me. And of course, Jennifer and I were praying together. And in the summer of 2022, I got a call from a good friend who was a part of Jesus Culture, and said, "Hey, we've got we realize here that we need a full time president for the label. Your name is at the top of that list. Would you consider this?" And I knew at the time, when I got the call, I was like, I think this might be what we've been feeling, for 2 years. But we did the due diligence and, did a bunch of conversations and make sure they knew what they were getting with me. and, and I knew what I was getting into, but, every step of the way, God just confirmed, just that, hey, this is a season, like everything that's happened in your life and your ministry up to this point is preparing you for this season. And so I felt really just a ton of peace, even though it was hard to step away from everything that we had built at Capital Worship Together. And we had there's an amazing team there. And, the good thing is we'd hired good people. We had really trained people up. And so me transitioning out eventually it was a celebration in a lot of ways for me and for that staff. But it was, from a business standpoint, it was kind of a non-event because they were already kind of running things. And I was able to move into this new role with Jesus Culture and just hit the ground running. And so it's been just an amazing, almost a year now since I stepped into that position. And and I'm loving it, man. I'm just affirmed every day. That's like, God is He knows better than I do, what my steps should be. And so I'm just super grateful that it's kind of landed the way it has.
That's amazing, Jim. The reason I wanted you to share that is because it's real important that folks hear and know that the infrastructure behind the worship teams they hear and the worship songs that do go around the world and and really help penetrate heart. Um, so many of the folks behind that, to hear your heart is for worship. Your heart is for the church. It's not just, well, this is a business and it's all about money.
Mm,
It's like you are a worship pastor and you come to this with the experience of 20 plus years of the industry and the knowledge of how to make the infrastructure work, for and within the church, but it's not void of the heart
mm,
and the reason why you're doing it. And that's really special. And
thank you.
we would like to think that that's not unique, but in the business of things, sometimes that can be unique. And so recently, you and I got to reconnect and sit down over a cup of coffee, and it was just a great time. And you were just sharing, like, coming in to this role and speaking with the team. Um, you were sharing something that you kind of used as a rule of thumb for writing for the church, and I've never heard this perspective. There may be
Mm,
others that have done it and do it and talk about it, but I've not heard anybody speak of this. But the template of the Lord's Prayer, by way of
mm,
writing for the church for worship, um, was something that just really struck with me and just stayed with me for a while. And I remember reaching out and saying, "Hey, would you mind sharing this
mm.
um, with Loop Community and the interview that we do, because I think it's just really important to be heard."
Yeah. Yeah, man. I don't know that there's anything that's new under the sun. I feel like there's variations of this thought that I've read and heard from different people. But, one of the things that I think, just being involved with songs and being around worship writers, and we're always thinking of ways of like, how can we inspire people? How can we, give people some direction? Maybe even a little bit of like a bumper of like, if you see a lot of songs heading a certain direction thematically, whatever. It's like, how do you bring people back to sort of like the center of like, hey, maybe this is what we should be focused on or writing about. And so I think, as you know, as a publisher, it's like you have that privilege to sort of speak into those areas. And I've always just kind of asked, like during seasons, like, okay, God, what are you doing right now in the church? And like, what should be the focus? Like, how are you leading? What are you speaking? And to be able to share that, with writers, not that they don't hear it on their own, but just for us collectively to talk about, just like, here's what we feel like, the church really wants to sing right now. And I was doing some study on the Lord's Prayer. I wasn't even studying it from a music standpoint. I was really studying it more from a prayer standpoint. I got
Yeah.
really involved with prayer ministry at our church over the last couple of years and became really passionate about it and just read a ton of books and just tried to learn as much as I could. And, I was studying that prayer, in Matthew. And I noticed as I was reading through it, I was like, there's really three parts to this prayer. I started to see a sort of a theme, kind of emerge out of the prayer in sort of this template. I was like, man, there's really three types of prayers that Jesus is communicating here. He's teaching us, which, just to back up a little bit, the context of this is, his disciples come to him and they say, hey, Lord, teach us how to pray. They come to him and they teach us how to pray. And so, I think Jesus could have said a lot, right? He could have given them a real theological lesson. He could have told them some parables, the way that he would teach, but he didn't. He actually taught them by praying a prayer and said,
Mhm.
when you pray, first off, which I think is a big part of this, it said, go away in your room, where nobody can see you and pray, and so he was kind of coming against this idea of like, an authentic prayer is one that is really nobody else sees it, but God sees it, and that's what God honors. And so that meant something to me. And then as I began to read through this prayer, I realized there was these three distinct sections of the prayer, and even starting from the beginning with "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name." I was like, man, that's like a prayer of reverence, right? That's worship right off the spot. It's like before we even get into like asking for anything, making any petition, anything like that. We're actually starting um, with worship, just recognizing who God is, recognizing His attributes. And so I was like, man, that's a prayer of reverence. And
Mhm.
then I read through, and I got into the next section. There, it's like, your will be done, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. And I was like, man, like that's praying for something that's not yet, but is coming.
Mm,
And I said, to me, that's a prayer of transcendence. In other words, we're praying across time and space, in faith of what Jesus has promised that He's going to do in the end. And that prayer beautifully ties into Revelation. When we get into Revelation 4 and 5, and you start getting that image of Jesus, the resurrected and the King Jesus that John sees and describes in Revelation, we start understanding like that prayer is actually reaching forward through time and space to a time when Jesus is going to return, and we're praying those things that they would happen on earth just like they are in heaven.
mm,
So I was like, man, what a beautiful like prayer of transcendence, a prayer that actually is bigger than anything that's around me. It actually transcends space and time, and the fact that Jesus says through showing us this prayer, we could actually pray for those things and believe those things to pass, just blows my mind. It just blows my mind. There's nothing. That prayer tells me there's nothing that's too big, too great, too out, that's too crazy that we can't pray and ask for, and that prayer will be heard. So
mm,
that was the second part of this, was the prayer of transcendence, and then you get into the give us this day our daily bread, forgive us of our trespasses, all the things that God knows we need, and obviously are legitimate prayers. These are prayers of dependence, and so these three sections that I identified, and I've seen variations of this, but what I saw was a prayer of reverence, prayer of transcendence, and a prayer of dependence.
mm.
And somewhere during this process, because you and I, like we're song people, sometime during this process, I said, wait a minute. I said, prayer is really, I mean, worship is really sung prayers.
Mm,
That's really what we're doing. I mean, if you look at the Psalms, those are prayers, but those were sung prayers as well. And even in some veins of the church, like when they get ready to worship, they'll say, hey, let's pray together. And that means that, like, let's agree together, let's sing these songs. So I thought, I was like, man, isn't that beautiful? What if the songs that we're creating, the songs that we were leading on Sunday, actually represented and hit those three styles or those three buckets within the Lord's Prayer? And so it really challenged me to think about like a worship set. Like if you're picking 3 or 4 songs for a Sunday, like is there a song in there that's just a song of worship? It's nothing about me. It's just about who God is. Is there a song in there that's really a prayer of transcendence? Like, are we singing about things like, we don't have a lot of new songs anymore that are about heaven, but back in the old days of the hymns, we used to sing
yeah.
about heaven all the time. And so those are like, I'll fly away. That's a song of transcendence. Like, one day, this is what's going to happen. One day, Jesus is going to return. And that great, how great thou art. Those last verses of those songs were transcendent in nature. And do I have some of those moments in my worship set? I have a moment like that. And then, of course, the songs of dependence, which I think as people, we're really comfortable going there because we recognize our need. We're comfortable singing about, what we're asking God to do. And so these are the songs like, Lord, I need you, or just as I am, like the old hymn, songs that
Mhm,
we're petitioning God to do something or to meet a need that we have. And so I thought at the time, I was like, man, what a healthy way to make sure that I'm not throwing all of I'm actually covering what Jesus said to pray. I'm not actually just singing about one thing. I'm not just singing songs of dependence. I'm actually making sure that I worship, that I recognize who God is. I'm actually singing songs that are proclaiming things that are not as though they were. And then, I'm actually, singing some songs and asking God for his provision, his help, is him to intercede for us. So it sort of turned, what started off as a prayer study turned into a kind of a worship study. And so it opened my mind a lot. It gave me a little bit of a framework to think about worship sets, but also worship songwriting. And so, as I would see, there's a season where I just saw a lot of songs that were like songs of dependence. It's like everybody was writing, especially like 2020, man, like was all songs of dependence. It's like, God help me through this time. But
Yes,
what I saw in the church in the last couple of years is things that were really resonating were songs of worship and songs of transcendence, and like the chorus song "Worthy of It All," which is has been around for a long time. All of a sudden, like made this big resurgence in the church. Everybody was singing that song because it just nothing about us. It was all about just who God was and what He's going to do in the future. So it really kind of helped bring a balance to that and gave me a little bit of a framework, at least to talk about it to songwriters.
yeah, yeah. So good, so good. Well, you guys just recently released a new record.
We did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty
It
exciting.
was, it was amazing. When I came on with Jesus Culture, it was November of 2022, and they were already sort of thinking album. They had done some writing for that, and but there wasn't any firm plans, and so I really kind of stepped into the thick of it. And granted, like me, man, like I'm a publishing guy. Like I understand the recording side of things, but that's not where I spent 17 years. I spent 17 years helping develop songs and
That's right.
resource the church. And so the recording piece of it, luckily I had some great partners with our label, and they helped us kind of get around producers and recording and like how we're going to do that. And but man, it was amazing. We started kind of into the process in November. We recorded in March, which was felt really fast to me. But I think the deadlines really helped. With creative, sometimes they need deadlines, and that actually worked in our favor because it forced people to just like, oh wow, we've got an album, we've got to have demos done in
Mm,
January, February to begin to produce, do pre-production on these. I've got to get into gear. And so it actually, it mobilized all of our writers and our artists to really begin to kind of to dial in and to write. And it was amazing. I think we got some incredible songs out of it. And it was that good blend. I felt like going into this record, I mean, we're coming out of 2020, 2021, and Jesus Culture is located in California, and man, God bless the church in California. They had a heck of a time in 2020, um, and we're just starting to see, just like light at the end of that tunnel. And so, we really felt like with this record, it's like this album is about Thanksgiving. It's about joy. It's just a celebration that the church is not going to be overcome. We're still together. We're still singing together, and so I think that reflected a lot in this album. There's a lot of songs of joy. There's a lot of songs of faith, a lot of songs of transcendence as well. Just songs singing about things that we're proclaiming today that is not yet come yet, but we're believing them to happen. So it turned out great. Had a whole bunch of worship leaders. I think we had 8 artists on this record. And so
wow.
it was a lot of people, but we really felt like, during this season, we really needed to show um, just the audience and the people that were fans of Jesus Culture, like this is a movement, and this is who we are. And there's a lot of pieces to this. There's a lot of faces, but we're a collective, and we're all on mission together. And so this record, with besides the music, for churches and for worship listeners, it was really also just a statement of, what, we're a community, and we're very united in this. And so the way it turned out, the way it worked out was really great. But it was a lot of hard work.
I could imagine. Yeah, stepping right in, huh? That's
Yes.
pretty wild. Well, congratulations on seeing it through, and you know what it's like when you get one done. There's not a lot of breathing time to start
No,
considering.
that's right. Well, then you get, I feel for artists, because they'll have a release and it's like, if it's successful, it's like amazing. And now they start feeling the pressure of having to follow it up,
Right.
with the next recording. And so I definitely feel a little bit of that, but we're really excited going into next year and just excited about trying some new things. I think, worship music is continuing as it always has, is continuing to change, and the needs of the church continue to change. And so I'm actually really excited and optimistic for next year of just trying some things and doing some things that are maybe a little bit outside the box. And so, yeah, I'm excited. I'm not going to try to totally recreate what we've already done. So I'm taking the pressure off.
Yeah. Well, is there, we've got the album. We're very thankful to have the album up and it's available at Loop Community. Are there a focus track or two that we should point to and highlight and say, hey, this is the one we need to all jump on as a church?
Yeah, I mean, you know how songs are, man. These they're like your babies, your kids. So like it's hard to really kind of pick one or two. But everything that has breath, which was from Brian and Katie Torwald, immediately we knew was something really special about that song. Um, the other song that was, you kind of go in thinking like, man, I think there's something really special here, but I don't really know. But one of the songs that really did great, just kind of right out of the release was Christmas. Can you hear my dog, Chad?
I can't a little bit. It's all right.
Is it distracting? Sorry. It's probably the Amazon delivery guy. No, but there was a song from Chris McCarney that has done super well just right out of the gate. Let the People Sing, and again, I think this was part of just this celebration of like, man, we're so glad to be back together as a church and operating normally. Um, and so there's Chris Kilala's got a couple of songs that are so Chris Kilala. It just reminds you of the great things that you loved about Jesus culture. And actually, one of the unique things on this record was Lindy Kofer, who has been a friend of Jesus culture. I love Lindy. I actually was some part of signing Lindy as a writer when I was at Capitol, and she's such a gift and such an amazing worship leader and a person. But she actually joined us on this album as well on a couple of songs. So it's hard to pick a few, but if you need something like a song one to open up your church, I would say "Let the People Sing" or "Faith for It" from Derek Johnson. And everything that has breath is just one of those power songs. And if you're a revival church, you should check out "No One Else." Tear Down the Idols from Lindy, and that will set your heart on fire as well. But
That's
it's an amazing group of songs. There's some new faces on it too, which is exciting for me. There's some leaders there that are going to be new to people, and that warms my heart because I'm all about just helping raise up this next generation of worship leaders. So I think there's something on there for everybody, and super thankful for Loop Community just for the resources, how you guys have served the church so faithfully over the years, and just the innovative tools. Chad, what would we have done when we were in church if we would have had stems at the time, right?
oh man, it would have been crazy.
But what you guys are doing is such a gift, and you guys are so innovative with what you're doing. And so, man, I'm super thankful for you guys and just how you guys have faithfully served. And I'm glad that Matt chased his dream and brought this thing forward as much as he has. But you guys have been amazing and an amazing partner. And so just super grateful for what you guys are doing.
Oh man. Well, thank you so much. And on behalf of the Loop Community team, thank you and Jesus Culture for what you're doing.
Yeah, man. It was great spending time with you. Hey, anytime you want to hang out, Chad, let's grab coffee.
Let's do it.